Imagine walking through a crowded street where thousands of lives intersect, each person carrying the silent burdens of their desires, ambitions, and fears. Among them, there exists one figure whose gaze does not settle on the trivialities of daily survival. This individual sees beneath the veil, beyond appearances, into the pulsating machinery of existence itself. To most, the world is a stage on which to play out needs and wants. But for the genius, the world is a riddle whose solution is at once intoxicating and unbearable. This is not merely intelligence. This is not the quickness of wit or the memorization of facts. This is something far more unsettling, an orientation of consciousness that is both gift and curse. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of philosophy's most merciless psychologists of the human condition, claimed that genius is not simply a heightened ability, but rather a profound difference in perception. While ordinary people are chained to the urgencies of their will, to survival, procreation, social approval, the genius detaches, often painfully, from this endless striving. The genius, according to Schopenhauer, does not live primarily for himself. He becomes a vessel through which truth, beauty, or terror manifests. He once wrote, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." What an unnerving thought, that genius is less about achievement and more about vision, about perceiving dimensions of reality that remain invisible to others. This explains why geniuses are often out of step with their time, regarded as eccentrics, dreamers, or even madmen. Their insight tears away the comfortable illusions by which society sustains itself. Their inner lives are both luminous and tragic, a fire that illuminates and consumes simultaneously. But let us pause and ask, what does it mean to live in such a state? Imagine, for instance, an artist who, in the middle of a crowded cafe, is suddenly overwhelmed by the unbearable poignancy of existence. The way the light filters through dusty windows, the fleeting expressions on anonymous faces, the inescapable knowledge of mortality. For the ordinary mind, such impressions pass unnoticed. For the genius, they pierce the soul with a painful clarity that demands expression. Carl Jung hinted at this when he observed, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. The creative mind plays with the objects it loves." The genius is compelled, almost against his will, to give form to inner visions. He does not simply choose to create. He is driven to do so, lest he implode under the weight of what he sees. And yet, the gift is never free. To perceive more deeply is also to suffer more acutely. Where others find comfort in distractions, the genius is haunted by questions that have no easy answers. Why is there suffering? What is the meaning of beauty if it vanishes? Why must we create in a world destined to dissolve? The genius cannot look away. This is why the psychology of genius, as Schopenhauer presents it, is not a celebration of extraordinary talent alone, but a confrontation with the price of extraordinary vision. It is to live on the razor's edge between illumination and despair, between ecstasy and alienation. And so, the enigma arises. Is genius a blessing to be envied, or a burden to be pitied? To answer this, we must dive deeper into Schopenhauer's philosophy of will, perception, and the restless fire that animates the genius soul. To understand the psychology of genius through Schopenhauer's eyes, we must first confront the foundation of his entire philosophy: the will. For him, the will is not reason, not intellect, not even consciousness. It is a blind, ceaseless, and irrational force that drives all of existence. Every creature, from the smallest insect to the most ambitious human, is enslaved to this will. The relentless drive to survive, to reproduce, to accumulate, to strive without end. It is the cosmic hunger that underlies every heartbeat, every desire, every ambition. Ordinary people, Schopenhauer argued, are deeply entangled in this tyranny. Their days are consumed with the pursuit of goals that, once achieved, only give rise to new cravings. Satisfaction is fleeting, like a drop of water on parched lips. Happiness, he insisted, is not the presence of fulfillment, but merely the temporary absence of pain. In this cycle of striving, most remain trapped, hardly aware that they are being carried along by an endless current of insatiability. But the genius, Here lies the distinction is not entirely bound by this cycle. In moments of pure contemplation, the genius is capable of suspending the will, of stepping outside the frenzied striving of existence. Instead of being enslaved to desires, the genius gazes upon the world as pure representation, as a spectacle to be seen in its raw essence. This detachment allows for the creation of art, philosophy, and breakthroughs that ordinary consciousness could never produce. Yet this detachment is double-edged. To perceive existence as representation means also to glimpse its futility. Where the ordinary person is shielded by illusion, the comforting stories of progress, success, and permanence, the genius stares into the void and sees the truth of endless becoming endless loss. Nietzsche, once a devoted reader of Schopenhauer before forging his own path, captured this paradox when he wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, but for the genius the why is elusive." The visions that grant artistic or intellectual brilliance also expose the terrifying groundlessness beneath human striving. Consider, for example, the composer who hears in his mind a symphony so vast and sublime that no orchestra can fully capture it. In those moments, he escapes the will, glimpsing something eternal. Yet, when the music ends, reality floods back in. The loneliness, the trivial demands of daily life, the crushing awareness that such beauty is fleeting. Or imagine the philosopher who pierces through the illusions of society, recognizing the absurdity of its ambitions. He cannot return to innocence, cannot unsee what he has seen. Such clarity, though liberating, often breeds despair. The genius thus lives suspended between two realms, the ordinary world of restless striving and the extraordinary realm of contemplative vision. He belongs fully to neither. Among common men, he feels alien, misunderstood, estranged. Among gods, if such exist, he would be too fragile, too human, too tormented by the burden of expression. Aldous Huxley, in his Reflections on Human Consciousness, once remarked, "Genius is an abnormality. It is the emergence in an unusual degree of qualities which are normally present in every man." In other words, genius is not something foreign to humanity, but an exaggeration, an intensity of what already dwells within us all. And because it is an exaggeration, it disturbs the balance of ordinary life, stretching perception to its breaking point. Here, we begin to see why so many geniuses throughout history lived lives marked by isolation, melancholy, or madness. It is not because they were defective, but because they saw too much, felt too deeply, and bore the unbearable weight of seeing reality without its disguises. The next step, then, is to ask, how does this unbearable vision shape the way genius interacts with art, science, and the world? Is creation itself a form of escape from the tyranny of the will, or is it another expression of the very force they seek to transcend? If the will is the prison that binds all living beings, then art, according to Schopenhauer, is the rare key that can unlock the bars, if only for a fleeting moment. The genius, burdened with the gift of heightened perception, cannot escape the torment of seeing reality stripped bare, but he can translate that vision into creation. Art, for Schopenhauer, is not mere entertainment or ornamentation. It is a profound act of liberation, a temporary suspension of the tyranny of desire. When the genius creates, or when we, as mere spectators, immerse ourselves in that creation, we step outside of time and self. For a moment, the gnawing hunger of the will is silenced, and we perceive the world as pure form, pure beauty, pure truth. The artist does not paint or compose or write simply to amuse, but to reveal. The painting, the symphony, the poem, they are not escapes in the trivial sense but portals through which others may glimpse the world as the genius sees it. Consider the tragic paradox here. The genius creates to ease his suffering, but in doing so, he also exposes the rest of us to that same unbearable clarity. A Beethoven symphony overwhelms not because it is pleasant, but because it forces us to confront the sublime, that mixture of terror and beauty beyond comprehension. A Dostoevsky novel devastates not because it entertains, but because it drags us into the abyss of moral conflict and existential despair. In such moments, we experience what the genius lives with perpetually. Jean-Paul Sartre once declared, Every word has consequences. Every silence, too. For the genius, silence is impossible. The visions must pour forth even if they alienate, even if they destroy. The act of creation is not a luxury. It is survival. Without it, the genius would be suffocated by his own perception, drowned in the relentless flood of impressions and insights. But Schopenhauer did not stop at saying art consoles the genius. He elevated art to the highest form of knowledge. Scientific thinking, though powerful, remains bound to causality, to the logic of the will. Art, on the other hand, reveals the eternal ideas behind the transient phenomena. In this sense, art is metaphysical. It grants us access to timeless patterns that lie beneath the chaos of appearances. When the genius paints a portrait, he is not capturing a particular face, but the essence of humanity itself. When the poet writes of love, it is not a personal longing, but the universal flame of desire that burns through every generation. And yet, here is the cruelty of it all. The genius himself rarely finds lasting peace in creation. Each artwork, however magnificent, is only a temporary reprieve. The moment the piece is complete, the hunger of the will resurfaces. The silence after the symphony is often deafening, plunging the creator back into solitude, despair, or manic striving. This is why so many geniuses lived lives that seemed perpetually unsettled, their greatest works born out of torment rather than tranquility. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on the meaning of suffering, wrote, "What is to give light must endure burning. The genius, then, is both light-bringer and the one consumed by fire. His creations illuminate the path for others but leave him scorched, never wholly free from the torment of existence." Thus, art is both salvation and curse. It liberates the genius only by deepening his wound, offering moments of transcendence while reminding him that such transcendence is never permanent. From this paradox, we move into an even darker question. What toll does this perpetual tension take on the psyche of the genius? How does it shape their relationship to society, to solitude, and ultimately to madness? To be a genius, in Schopenhauer's view, is to live in exile, not necessarily in geography but in spirit. The ordinary world moves with a rhythm dictated by appetite and custom, working for security, pursuing pleasures, seeking recognition. But the genius, whose perception penetrates beneath appearances, cannot easily join in this dance. He sees the futility behind ambition, the fragility behind pleasure, the hollowness beneath fame. What others pursue with zeal, he often regards with indifference or even quiet despair. This detachment is both the source of his brilliance and the seed of his isolation. Society, as Schopenhauer observed, is structured to reward conformity, not depth. To deviate from the shared illusions is to risk ridicule, rejection, or neglect. The genius may offer truths of staggering depth, yet be dismissed in his lifetime as a dreamer or lunatic. Only later, often after death, is he recognized for the prophetic fire he carried. Friedrich Nietzsche once confessed, "Madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages, it is the rule." The genius, perceiving the collective madness of society, often appears mad to those around him. This is not merely a matter of eccentric habits or unconventional lifestyles. It is the result of living in a different psychological atmosphere altogether, breathing the thin, rarefied air of insight that most find suffocating. History is littered with examples. The tortured isolation of Van Gogh, who painted worlds of color while living in poverty and despair. The manic oscillations of Sylvia Plath, whose poetic genius coexisted with unbearable inner turmoil. The relentless obsessions of Nikola Tesla, whose brilliance seemed indistinguishable from madness. In each case, the same heightened sensitivity that enabled transcendent creation also made ordinary life almost impossible to endure. Schopenhauer saw this isolation as inevitable. The genius lives not for himself but for the vision that passes through him. While others pursue community, wealth, or legacy, he is consumed by the task of giving form to what he sees. This makes him, paradoxically, both deeply necessary to humanity and profoundly estranged from it. Society needs the genius to expand its horizons, yet rarely welcomes him while he lives. And the cost is not only external. Internally, the genius wrestles with forces that threaten to break the psyche apart. The constant tension between vision and expression, between transcendence and futility, can erode the stability of the self. Moments of profound clarity often alternate with crushing despair. To perceive too much is to carry a burden that ordinary consciousness was not designed to hold. Aldous Huxley reflected on this precarious condition when he remarked, "The more powerful and original a mind, the more it will incline towards the religion of solitude. Solitude is both refuge and prison. In solitude, the genius finds the space to create, to contemplate, to sustain his fragile detachment from the will. Yet too much solitude, too much estrangement, risks collapsing into madness, as the absence of shared reality becomes unbearable. Thus, the line between genius and madness is not a clean boundary but a shadowed twilight. The same faculties that open the door to transcendence also open the abyss. What makes one man a visionary makes another a madman. The difference often lies not in the perception itself but in the ability or inability to bear its weight. And so the question deepens: if genius isolates, if it threatens sanity itself, what sustains it? What keeps the genius from falling completely into despair or dissolution? To answer, we must turn to the genius's relationship with suffering itself, and how, through suffering, meaning is carved out of existence. The life of a genius, as Schopenhauer portrays it, is inseparable from suffering. Not incidental suffering, not the occasional misfortune that befalls us all, but a fundamental suffering rooted in the very structure of existence. For Schopenhauer, to live is to suffer, for life itself is the endless striving of the will. And because the genius perceives this truth with terrifying clarity, he suffers more deeply than those who are content to be deceived by distractions and illusions. Yet suffering, paradoxically, is also the crucible in which genius is formed. Without suffering, there is no urgency to transcend. Without pain, there is no hunger for insight. Ordinary men may flee from suffering into diversion, but the genius faces it, wrestles with it, and ultimately transforms it into creation. In this sense, suffering is both torment and raw material, both the wound and the source of strength. Viktor Frankl, who endured the horrors of the concentration camps, insisted that suffering can be transfigured into meaning. In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice. For the genius, meaning is often discovered not in comfort or success but in the very act of bearing suffering with awareness, of turning it into vision, into art, into philosophy. The genius cannot eliminate suffering. Indeed, Schopenhauer would say that is impossible, but he can illuminate it, transforming private anguish into universal insight. Consider Dostoevsky, who survived imprisonment, illness, and financial ruin, yet out of his agony produced novels that probed the darkest corners of human existence. Or Beethoven, tormented by deafness, who nonetheless composed works of transcendent beauty. Their genius did not cancel their suffering. It forged their suffering into something enduring. This is the alchemy of the genius mind, the transformation of torment into transcendence. But transcendence, for Schopenhauer, does not mean escape in the religious sense. There is no paradise awaiting the genius, no cosmic consolation. Transcendence is temporary, fleeting, a momentary suspension of the will in which one glimpses eternity through the lens of art, music, philosophy. It is not salvation in a permanent sense but reprieve, a brief breath of air before sinking once more into the ocean of striving. This makes the genius both tragic and heroic. Tragic, because he knows that his visions are impermanent, that even his greatest works cannot erase the fundamental futility of existence. Heroic, because he continues nonetheless, compelled to create, to give shape to what he perceives, to bear witness to the truth even when it offers no comfort. Jean-Paul Sartre, grappling with the abyss of existence, put it starkly: man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. For the genius, this responsibility is magnified. He is condemned not only to live but to see, to create, to bear witness. Freedom for him is not light but heavy, weighted with the demand to make meaning out of suffering that cannot be eradicated. And yet, therein lies the strange, redemptive power of genius. Though the genius himself may remain restless, tormented, even broken, his creations offer meaning to others. His suffering becomes a bridge, allowing countless souls to glimpse truths they might otherwise never face. In this sense, the genius transcends not by escaping suffering but by transforming it into a beacon for humanity. But what, finally, does this tell us about the place of genius in the grand scheme of existence? Is the genius merely a tragic accident of nature, or does he serve a deeper necessity within the human story? To answer this, we must turn at last to the final dimension of Schopenhauer's vision, the role of genius as humanity's reluctant prophet, burdened with the task of truth. What, then, is the final destiny of genius? If his life is marked by isolation, torment, and fleeting transcendence, why does nature produce such beings at all? For Schopenhauer, the answer lies in the role the genius plays not only for himself but for humanity at large. The genius is less an individual than a conduit, an instrument through which truth, beauty, and the essence of existence reveal themselves. He is humanity's reluctant prophet, carrying visions that others cannot bear to see, yet desperately need to encounter. While ordinary men are driven forward by the will, ensnared in its endless cycles of desire, the genius is momentarily freed from that compulsion and thus capable of perceiving life from a standpoint beyond striving. What he perceives, he expresses through art, music, philosophy, science. His works become mirrors in which others glimpse dimensions of existence that remain otherwise hidden. In this way, the genius serves not only himself but the species, enlarging the horizon of human consciousness. But this service is not chosen. The genius does not wake one morning and decide to bear the weight of humanity's truth. He is compelled, driven by forces within that he neither asked for nor controls. His gift is inseparable from his curse. In this sense, he is a prophet against his will, destined to wander between the ordinary world of striving and the extraordinary realm of vision. Carl Jung, who spent his life exploring the archetypal depths of the psyche, once noted, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The genius does precisely this. He drags the darkness into the light, not because he wants to, but because he cannot help himself. His insights illuminate not only beauty but also horror, not only order but also chaos. He does not sugarcoat existence. He reveals it in its unvarnished truth. And yet, here lies the irony. The very society that benefits from the genius's revelations often rejects or resists him. Prophets are rarely welcomed in their own time. The genius threatens comfort, dismantles illusions, unsettles the narratives that hold society together. Only when time has passed, and the rawness of his message is dulled, does society embrace him, celebrating what once it feared. Thus, the genius lives and dies in tension, necessary to humanity, but rarely at home within it. Still, his work endures. Long after his body has returned to dust, the music, the paintings, the words remain. They whisper truths across centuries, igniting minds that never knew him in life. In this way, the genius achieves a form of immortality, not the personal immortality of religious consolation, but the enduring influence of vision crystallized into creation. Nietzsche, wrestling with both admiration and rebellion against Schopenhauer, remarked, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. The genius soars not to be admired, but because his wings are part of his being. He cannot remain earthbound, even if flying costs him his peace." And so, the psychology of genius, as Schopenhauer paints it, is not a tale of triumph but of tragic grandeur. The genius is the seer who cannot close his eyes, the artist who must create or perish, the thinker who cannot stop asking questions that unravel the fabric of certainty. He is condemned to vision, condemned to solitude, condemned to the endless task of bearing witness. Yet through this condemnation, humanity itself is enriched. For in the fire of the genius's torment, light is born, light that reveals the truth of existence, fragile, terrifying, and sublime. And though the genius may never find rest, his visions carve pathways for others, guiding us, however briefly, beyond the prison of the will. This, then, is the paradox. Genius is both a wound and a gift, both suffering and salvation. The genius does not belong to himself. He belongs to truth, and through him, truth belongs to us all.